Hey guys, welcome back to the Rebunch. Guess what day it is? Whoop whoop! It is June 19th, otherwise known as Juneteenth. And this year we had a heck of a celebration for Juneteenth. Our very first one. Last year my mom was like, not doing it, not celebrating everybody else's freedom and not our own. So I thought it was a great idea. We ran with it and we had a fantastic celebration. So I'm going to show you, what is Juneteenth all about? I'm going to give you the history of Juneteenth today. Stay tuned.
Okay, so we decided that we're not celebrating the 4th of July this year. No, not this year. And let me tell you why. Because we weren't free. Duh. Okay? June 19th is our freedom. Who is our? The black people. The blacks. Because we were still slaves in the world. So, we're doing Juneteenth this year. Who's joining us? We're excited! I'll black everything. All day. Who are we? What was that saying that Issa Rae said? Who you voting for? No, I'm rooting for everyone black. We're rooting for everybody black this year. That's what we're doing. Are we doing it like fireworks the whole 9 yards? But we're not doing it July 4th, June 19th. We're actually going to do the weekend. So that's like the 16th, 17th. Juneteenth. Yay. Black people rock.
History of America, the prosperity and greatness of America were founded on two fundamental things.
Of Juneteenth.
One is the slavery. Slavery was basically allowed for America to pull the natural resources from America without paying for the labor. And so slavery was an economic driver for America. The second economic driver for America was the Louisiana Purchase. Louisiana Purchase was
$14 million.
15 actually. For 14 and a half, $15 million. But basically, we have Haiti to thank for the Louisiana Purchase. We'll go down that for a minute. Because Haiti was in a civil war with France, and basically a small country that was being taken over by Napoleon, and Haiti put the drama on Napoleon, sucked the resources from France, which caused them to no longer be able to financially afford to have a land outside of their land. So they sold the Louisiana colony, or the Louisiana Purchase, which included the port of Louisiana, which is in New Orleans, to America for $15 million. Opening up the entire West to America and making really the single largest land, natural resource grab for any country in history. But I digress. But during that time, the main thing for America was being able to take care of their natural resources. Slavery allowed them to do that at a very cheap cost for a young country. In 1862, President Lincoln wrote in the Emancipation Proclamation, which essentially freed the slaves. After which, the country seceded. We ended up going into a civil war. So January 1, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation becomes a actual act. It's not a law, it's an act. And the reason it couldn't be a law is because the country was divided. So they couldn't have a full vote of the Congress because we had no country. We had makeshift representatives in the House of Representatives and the Senate because half of the senators were no longer there. They were part of the Confederate States of America. So in 1865, when the country started to come back together, it was discovered that even though the Emancipation Proclamation had quote-unquote freed the slaves, almost 3 years past emancipation, the province of Texas still had almost 400,000 to 500,000 or something like that slaves in the province of Texas, because they did not recognize that the Union had passed an Emancipation Proclamation.
And that was around the places that now today good places go for spring break, around Galveston.
Galveston. All those places that black people run to,
just like
to actually
South Carolina.
Food.
Just like
right.
No,
there's a port in South Carolina which every black person in America, you can pull about 98% of every black person has come through that as their point of origin on where they came in from the slave trade. So anyway, so in 1865. They come back together, full Congress is back together to actually ratify this emancipation into law. clearly abolishing slavery rather than just an act which basically made it okay for owners to no longer have slaves.
And Negroes was in Savannah, Georgia, waiting on General Sherman to give them their 40 acres and a mule.
Absolutely.
But that never happened because that was just a promise when he burnt Atlanta and he went from, I guess it was Jackson, Mississippi, and he went from Jackson, Mississippi to the coast, which was Savannah's on the coast. And
let's talk about the 40 acres and a mule for a second, because you hear black people talk about it a lot, but really don't talk about what that means.
Up in that.
So after the Civil War, it was promised to all citizens of the United States that were in the southern provinces. That was one of the conditions of the ceasefire. That if you come back into the Union, that as a part of you coming back, part of the ceasefire is that every citizen will be granted land and property. Land and the ability to sustain themselves. So 40 acres and a mule. Land and a mule to hold the land, so to speak. But what ends up happening, and this is where in history, where we go forward and go back at the same time, where for every Emancipation Proclamation, you have the robbery of the 40 acre and the mule. Because what happens is when that becomes law, also as a rider in the Emancipation Proclamation becoming law, that's when also, and it's in the Constitution, that we aren't full people. So it says that the Emancipation Proclamation, does two things: that it freed the slaves, but it also reconstituted how we order elections, and we account for people in a census. So it says that every year, whereas the United States is an independent country, yada yada yada, it says that we will count the number of people to determine how many representatives a specific state has, and they will count every number of citizens plus 3/5 of every slave. So that goes away when you no longer have slavery. So they determined, and the Supreme Court actually ruled on it, that because of that amendment, and that amendment hadn't been 86, that basically you couldn't get 40 acres and a mule as a citizen of the United States, because the Constitution already said that it's a black.
The women too.
Yeah, that's a whole different.
But I'm just saying.
That's a whole different video. We probably need some iCloud and stuff to talk about the way the country has abused, raped, pillaged, and robbed women on every possible level, from human rights violations to financial violations that are still going on to this day. Just a quick aside, picture this. Slaves were freed in 1862, 63, 1865.
January 1st, 1863.
Women didn't get the right to vote till almost 100 years later. But we digress.
January 1st, 1863,
right.
Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which basically turned the tide of the war, because now you had slaves able to fight for the Union, whereas most slaves at that time were fighting for the Confederacy. So, like I said,
and they really didn't have a choice.
Yeah,
they fought for the Confederacy because, for the same reason they stayed in slavery, it was either fight or die, work or die. And so the options are it's between bad and horrible, or worser and worser, probably better stated. But after the Emancipation Proclamation, it basically almost tripled the Union's army. And 2 years after the Emancipation was signed, well, it was less than 2 years after the Emancipation was signed, there was also a U.S. Army order that allowed the slaves who were fighting to be paid a normal working wage. They weren't paid. I think the Army people were paid $20 a day or something, and the slaves ended up getting paid $5 to $7 a day, maybe $10, something like that. It was like right at half. But that was a big deal because up to that point, all these black people had never had an independent wage of their master. They worked on the land, and of course, in conjunction with you working for the land, you got to eat, you got to worship, and all this kind of stuff. But you didn't have your independent wage. You didn't have any money for yourself. And so anyway, going back to why we even talking about this in Juneteenth. Yeah, so all these slaves are still living in Texas, and Texas cited that the reason they hadn't freed the slaves is because they didn't recognize the order. that because they weren't a part of the Union when the Emancipation was signed, that they didn't have to abide by that proclamation. They had no obligation to abide by the proclamation. So it was actually signed into law in 1865, and basically it ends up going in with the new calendar year at that time, which happened June the 1st, 1865. But the word took a while to get out. So basically they had this celebration party that started on January the 19th, 1865, where basically all of these slaves who had been living in slavery and had been hearing for basically 3 or 4 years about their freedom now knew that they were a part of that same freedom. So like everybody else celebrates July 4th as their independence, June the 19th ends up becoming a new independence for the enslaved Negro. So Juneteenth, and a lot of people in the South celebrate Juneteenth. We celebrate it every year in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, because a lot of the slave states of the Confederacy, some of them still don't know that all this is happening.
Happy Juneteenth!
Grace, come on!
It is Juneteenth. Pause real quick. Yep, I'm deep conditioning. Don't even judge me. If you are interested in celebrating Juneteenth next year, just go ahead and join us. We're going to be having a fantastic time. You know, get on Facebook, look up the events in your area. It's very possible that your city is already doing something to celebrate Juneteenth. If they're not, do something yourself. Like, jump out there and create some fantastic event for everybody to join in on, because let me tell you, this is worth celebrating. Our freedom is worth celebrating. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and all that jazz. Bye.